Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Care About the CARES Act. We do too. I'm Liz Burkhart, and I'm the Director of Marketing for Agile Education Marketing. And I am delighted to bring to you today Ms. Meredith Bessinger and Dr. Arletha Harmon. So for our session today, I'm going to go through some housekeeping things and set the stage a little bit for us and how the three of us put this session together, and then we'll roll right into the topics and information that we have to get started. So for housekeeping, first and foremost, thank you for taking time out of your incredibly busy days to join us today. We also know that everyone is juggling home and work that have all suddenly become the same place for so many of us. We have our kids at home, we have our pets who are delighted that we're home. So if you get distracted, if you need to take care of something, don't worry about it. We are recording this, so you will receive that link in an email in the next probably 24 hours. And I will be functioning as our Master of Ceremonies, as well as our behind the scenes technical support. So if you have questions, use the right hand menu bar and ask those questions, and we'll save those to the end. If you have a technical issue, if you wouldn't mind putting that in chat so that I can kind of see a little bit of what determine which type of action is needed, if I need to respond right away or if it can wait until the end. Everyone's lines are on mute, and we'll keep it that way, and we'll go back and forth between myself, Meredith, and Dr. Harmon. So to get us started, I'm Liz Burkhart again, and so I have been in marketing and database digital direct marketing since 99, 2000. And in 2006, I moved to Pearson, and that's when I sort of took all of my technical marketing background, and I have focused since then specifically on the education market, spending 10 years at Pearson, a few years at Odysseyware, that is now Edgenuity, and then and now I've been with Agile for about 2.5 years, sort of bringing together those two sides of my professional life. So I will be doing my best to think about our perspective as the businesses, as the sales and marketing professionals and business leaders that we are, and help asking the right questions and pulling out the right insights from Dr. Harmon and Meredith. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelist presenters today and thank them first and foremost for, one, taking the time out of their own busy days and schedules, but also for agreeing to do this very dynamic topic. And we're doing this format in a way that I think will get us some really valuable information, and it's going to definitely be worth all of our time. It also is a little, it's not terribly well produced. We're definitely prioritizing relevancy and timeliness of information over making sure that we have like awesome slides or great media for you all today. So just knowing what to expect. So first, let me introduce Meredith Bessinger, and she's going to be covering the K12 side of things for us today. She's an experienced classroom teacher and school administrator, and she holds a bachelor's in English education and a master's in K12 policy and leadership. Her primary focus has been faculty development and teacher training, although she also is a certified dyslexia therapist, and she has a passion for building literacy in rural communities. So not only does she have a really strong academic background, she definitely maintains her passion through education and teaching everyone. She also is a regular contributor of the Agile Education blog, Educator Perspective, and I believe we're going to be publishing one of her posts today. So we work with Meredith quite frequently. She's actually done webinars for us before, and she helps us bridge that gap between what's happening in schools and districts and how our educators seeing and perceiving things, and in the business world, how do we really understand what's going on? So I'm delighted, and thank you so much, Meredith, for joining us today. On the higher education side, I'm delighted to bring to you Dr. Arletha Harmon, and she is currently with Porterville College, and she is the Vice President of Finance and Administrative Services, and she's been there for the past 8 years. Her responsibilities are quite vast. So she manages the college's fiscal management, business, maintenance operations, auxiliary services, capital projects. She brings to us not only this great background in community college and higher ed, but also she has a very great background in K12. She was the business manager of a K12 school in northern Mississippi, overseeing things like accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, and then she also has some experience in the business, just the plain business side, more in the private sector, where she worked with the City of Los Angeles, Office of Treasurer and Mayor's Office, as well as the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica and the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So she too can really help us bridge that gap between the business world and the education world and bring us a lot of insights there for us to work with and help us make really good decisions. The other thing that the three of us bring to our discussion today is that we're all parents. So Meredith has 3 boys, ages 6, 8, and 10. I have 2 kids. I have a son who's 9 and a daughter who's 13. And Dr. Harmon has 2 boys, ages 14 and 17. So you can see that we are all parents, but we also run the gamut of what's going on in K12 education with schools and school closures and how we've all been managing this. So Meredith has some really great insights into this particular time and the dynamic nature of education and the business of education. And Dr. Harmon has some really great insights that'll help you understand why parents are even more important today than they have been. So there's really some great things that have come out. We met yesterday, we went through everything, and I think even as of this morning, at least Dr. Harmon, probably Meredith too, there's a bunch of new things going on. So again, thank you both for doing this, for taking the time to prepare everything for today. I'm going to go ahead and set the stage a little bit more with our agenda and a little bit about the overall CARES Act. So let's go through our basic agenda. We're going to make sure that we cover how much money there is, who's receiving it, who decides how it gets spent, what do the spending plans look like now, and what have the school closures actually revealed. We're going to close out with that, which is pretty interesting. Then we will go into questions for everyone. So let's start with, what is the CARES Act? So this isn't the first time that there's been an economic stimulus recovery package that's gone through, but the CARES Act, which stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, is intended to provide fast and direct economic assistance for American workers, families, and small businesses, and preserve jobs for our American industries. And you'll see throughout this deck that we've done our best to include links to where we got this information, because the main thing for all of us to keep in mind is this is ever changing. So you can definitely visit those websites, those web pages, and get probably even more up-to-date information than what we put together today. So how is this different? And there's one really important thing that I wanted to point out before we hand things over to Meredith. So back in 2008, we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and there was $789 billion that was part of that package. $100 billion of that went to education, mainly teacher salaries and Head Start programs. For 2020, there's been $2 trillion so far for the CARES Act, and you can see the list of things that it's intended to cover. And if you go down to the very bottom of this list, you'll see that the way that the education funds are being distributed is through state and local governments. And there's only been $27 billion so far. So one of the things that could potentially come out of this is there might just be more money for schools coming later. I personally have not read anything to that end. So this was just one thing I wanted to point out that we on our side at Agile had kind of noticed. And, you know, we're going to keep an eye on it. So I'm going to go ahead, Meredith, if you don't mind, and hand it over to you. Remember to unmute your line, and I will do that. And then Dr. Harmon, when she's gone through our set agenda of things, I'll hand it to you, and we'll go through yours, and then we'll move into questions from the audience. So Meredith.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to everybody on the webinar. We appreciate you. So one thing with the CARES Act, and we were talking about this yesterday, Dr. Harmon and Liz and I, it's new to everybody. The COVID-19 pandemic struck all of us quickly, and it was a surprise. And so I think as businesses, you're probably thinking, okay, how do we navigate this? And the good thing is educators are also asking that same question. And so it's a good time to build new relationships and revisit old relationships and offer your help, because everybody is trying to navigate this together and figure out what is best for their schools and their students. So the usage of the K12 CARES Act funding, 90% of that has to go to the local schools and districts per state. And then the 10% can go to emergency relief funding, but it's up to the local states, and then there's districts and schools to decide how to best utilize that. We live in different parts of the country. Different resources are required. There's different things that various schools need. And so it's good that they have kind of that freedom to be able to decide how they need to utilize that funding. The idea of these funds are for districts to provide maximum equity for students. And again, that will vary by district. And the disbursement of it was to the states, like Liz already mentioned. And so larger states with larger populations of students will obviously receive a larger amount of funding. But again, that's a great opportunity for businesses to reach out and offer assistance and see, is there new technology needed? Are there new learning resources needed for online or virtual learning? And that provides a great opportunity for you, as it provides a great opportunity for us as educators to kind of bridge this gap and see how we can come together to help our students. The state awards for the ESS-ER fund are in the same proportion as received. You'll see that on the slide there, so I don't need to read all of those statistics and numbers for you. But there was an application for funds that was needed, and they needed to apply to receive the ESS-ER funding, and those amounts have been released. And again, you still have states who are figuring out, and local school districts who are figuring out how to best utilize these funds. I just sat in a meeting on Tuesday, so yesterday, about our plans for this coming fall. And we're supposed to start school on August 6th, and that is just around the corner. And we are still figuring out what school will look like in the fall, how we're going to do this. And so if you're wondering, is it too late to reach out? Will we be bothering them? I know they're busy. Of course, everybody is busy right now. Everybody, yourselves included, I know that. But it's not too late to reach out, because so many people are still in planning mode, because things are changing and evolving every day, as we know. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to someone in the school district. You might not have the best or fastest response with the superintendent. You may want to reach out to a school principal, or if you have a contact with even a teacher that could help you, contact the right person in that school. That would be great as well.
Okay, Meredith, and I apologize, I didn't tee up the topic. So thank you. Thank you for covering what it says and pointing out that everyone's busy. And then I want to underline the point that you'd made earlier, that this is new for everyone. So one of the things that we were talking about yesterday is, with Agile, we work with a lot of startups, a lot of newer businesses, and people that are new to education. And This is the one upside on this is a level playing field for everyone because nobody has experience navigating this. So thank you for making that point. I want to make sure that everyone really understands that. Don't feel overwhelmed because everyone feels overwhelmed, which means we all feel the same way. So thank you for walking us through this and what it actually means. And let's move into what this means.
Okay. What it means, I think, is really important for everybody. It means additional resources for our students to be able to learn virtually no matter where they are. We have students who live in very rural communities who might not have the best internet access. And so that's something that's being taken into consideration in the use of these funds. Also, of course, additional virtual learning resources or continued subscriptions that are already in place. Um, Ensuring health and safety, cleaning the schools, sanitizing the schools, and making sure that the schools are a safe place for students and teachers to be in. And again, of course, just developing those plans for next school year and what that might look like. Each state has different guidelines that they've started to release via their own departments of education. And those guidelines are based on CDC guidelines. But as it stands, at least where I am in Mississippi, the schools have the freedom and the autonomy to kind of decide how they would like to open their own schools in their own district, and that may vary in other states. I'm not too sure to speak on other states and how they're doing that, but I know here in Mississippi, per district, they have that autonomy to be able to do that, which goes into local leaders are given the flexibility along with how they're going to open the schools on how to use the funds. And as long as those funds are used within the applicable and correct, federal education laws that are in place, then they have that flexibility to do so. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I think is the right word, for businesses and for educators and schools to work together because there is this flexibility in place. And I think that provides a lot of promise for all of you to be able to be provided with great new opportunities that you might not have had in the past because of this unfortunate pandemic. But it's also provided some opportunities for people to, kind of recreate the wheel a little bit.
Thank you for that, and also thank you for mentioning what state you're in. So that's something else that all three of us are across the country. So Meredith's in Mississippi, I myself am in Phoenix, Arizona, and Dr. Harmon is in Central California. So we also have a little bit of insights and experience based on that. So let's talk about priorities on the K-12 side, Meredith.
Sure. As you know, in education, our students come first. I was a classroom school teacher for a long time, and I think I speak for every educator when I say our students are our heart, and that's the reason why we do what we do. And their needs will vary by local school districts, depending on where those districts are. Just, there's a lot of things that come into play there. Distance education and online resources are obviously a hot topic right now as some schools will continue to learn virtually from home or possibly do a hybrid model where, they're at school certain days a week and then learning at home other days a week. And again, that internet access is so important for all students. For low-income students who might not have access to or regular access to the internet, or again, those rural students that don't have access to a stable internet connection is also something to be considered as a priority, definitely. Health and safety measures, of course, are a priority for everybody, across the board. And then those plans to reopen for fall 2020 that seem to change and vary daily as we are trying to figure out what is best, again, for our top priority, which is our students and their families and our teachers, and making sure that everybody is safe. And so I think it's and again, that word opportunity comes back up. I think it is a great time to reach out to districts and to schools and just offer, what can we help with? What do you need? Because they are trying to prioritize students first, their learning and their safety.
Mhm. Yes, it's a lot. So could we close out your section with some of the practical insights? And I don't know, even if between yesterday and today, if you have anything new to add. So I definitely want to open that up as well. But talk us through just some of the insights that you can share with all of us.
Sure, absolutely. Again, that available technology and internet connections for all students is so crucial. That they can be able to get onto Google Classroom or get onto a Zoom phone call with their teacher, or you'll see the next bullet point there, subscriptions that are commonly used, e-learning sites like Lexia, Renaissance, IXL, for their reading and their math, things like that. I know in my particular school district are important, and we've continued subscriptions with those because remote learning will continue to take place in some form or fashion. And then a lot of our students prior to the pandemic had access to like Lexia, so that they could practice it at home as part of their homework anyway. And so some of this kind of just continues on.
Mhm.
It's a practical insight as they need these tools to learn from home, but they probably, were utilizing some of these tools from home anyway. At least I know my children are and were. A hot topic that's been on the table for discussion with school closures is students with special needs. They rely heavily on the assistance that they receive at their schools, the intervention that they receive. So, for example, if you have a child who was in speech therapy and all of a sudden, they're not receiving their speech services, what does that look like? And so, things like Zoom have been, a practical and crucial need, and will continue to be so, to do so. And so those students who have any kind of special need, I mean, dyslexia, speech, ADD, ADHD, I mean, the list can go on. What does that look like for them? What resources are available for them or could be provided to them and to their families to ensure that they're still receiving a quality education and getting the extra assistance that they need in their homes, if that's what's going to happen in their particular school district.
Yeah, thank you. And that, yeah, and all of us are having to sort of coordinate and support to some extent teaching. And I think that we're definitely going to want to keep our eye on that one because that is an even greater need, right? But also it's more challenging for a parent. And so I think that these things are important. And if, us as businesses and organizations have solutions, that can be a really great way to connect with education leaders. I'm trying to think. Oh, and I think that one of the other points you made that I'm going to highlight before we move over to Dr. Harmon is, reaching beyond just the on paper school leaders. There's a lot of informal leaders throughout school, really influential teachers who've been there a long time and have a lot of relationships, a lot of insight. They can be formally or informally deputized to look into things. So really, I think that right now, expanding your communication to the people and maybe focusing more on the types of schools or districts who have traditionally been a really good fit for what you're offering would make a lot of sense. So that's kind of what I can offer up on that front. So before we move to Dr. Harmon, Meredith, is there anything else that you want to close us out with for right now?
I just had one extra thought
Good.
when you were talking about parents and learning in the home. Several school districts, as they start to or continue to make these plans, what school might look like in fall 2020, are sending out parent surveys. and
Mhm.
they're doing that, through a Google Doc or something like that. And they're asking parents, what works for you? And I think sometimes, parents have always been teachers, but in the last 5 months, they've really put that hat on, literally, and been their teacher in their home. And so I guess my closing thought would be, yes, teachers, superintendents, principals, school districts, but let's not forget about parents. They are a important party to market to, because they are still teaching their children in the home in some form or fashion.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we'll move over and go through the higher ed thing, and just a heads up, Meredith and Dr. Harmon, we are getting quite a few questions. So it'll be a really rich final section that we have. So just so you guys are aware of that. So Dr. Harmon, let's go through everything, and we'll just structure this the same way we did K12. So let's just start with, the CARES Act in action in higher ed.
And thank you, Liz. I think just transitioning over to higher ed from K-12, the unique perspective that I'll bring is that community colleges are sandwiched in between K-12 and the universities. So we're educating both high school students and adult learners. A unique thing about the CARES Act is that the funding is not used in any shape, form, or fashion for direct aid to those high school students. So K-12 is fully covering those students that are taking classes on our campuses in terms of supporting in some shape, form, or fashion. Another transition point is that in K-12, they're funded through average daily attendance. So they need to have those students and to show that they're making contact and that those students are at least participating, of course, with 60% of the day. In higher ed, it's a census date. So our students enroll, and then we're delivering content to them throughout the semester. So I think you'll see as I'm going through the usages of the funds, some of those distinctions are driving the ways in which our monies are being dispersed. So for higher ed, at least half of the funds must be spent in direct student aid. So what does it mean when I say direct student aid? What is that? So that for us was grants to students for food, for housing, for course materials, to purchase technology, for healthcare, or for childcare. So a substantial amount, and we'll go into the percentages in a future slide, a substantial amount of the money was distributed directly to our students to help and make sure that education was stabilized, that they weren't dropping out, but that we made funding available to help them to continue to pursue higher education. It was so important because the students that we're educating are becoming the EMTs, the nurses, the police, the firefighters that we're needing to provide services to the general public. The Department of Education did put restrictions on the other portion of the funds that were distributed to the institutions, that being the non-direct student aid. And those funds are used primarily for those that need it the most. So those individuals that are Pell eligible, and that's just a funding source. So basically saying those students who completed a financial aid or a FAFSA application and were deemed to be low income are the ones that should be getting the majority and all of the funds and to support them. So the CARES Act did not fund and cannot be used to support students that were solely online. So before the shutdown, they were already taking 100% in exclusive online classes. So if you're a vendor and you're looking for, well, how can I see how college ABC or university Y is choosing to disperse their dollars to their students and on their campus? Each college website is required to have and to publish the criteria that they're using to distribute CARES funds. So some institutions I've noticed are putting it on their homepage. Other institutions will have this information on their financial aid page, but that's a requirement for all higher education entities to publish so the public is aware of how that particular institution has deemed appropriate to distribute the funds. So again, the main purpose of the disbursements are to support the local education and the academic support of the students. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about what the CARES Act actually says. And you know, Dr. Harmon, one thing that just occurred to me that I don't think we've talked about so far is the 2008 stimulus package. I believe I'm remembering correctly that the funds for education were only for K12. So this is the first time that higher ed is getting anything. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, so with ARRA funds, and I was in K-12 at that time, ARRA
Okay.
funds were used to help support teachers and to help districts that weren't getting the tax revenue to support their local education to help them to prevent layoffs.
Okay.
So there are a lot of funds that were designated towards teacher support and maintaining teacher salaries. And there
Okay.
were other awards from ARRA that did support other institutions, but not to the same extent that K-12 received funding.
Okay. Thank you.
So what does the CARES Act say for higher education? 75% of the funds were awarded based on, again, as I said, the Pell Grant. And then 25% of those funds were allocated looking at the institution portion. And we'll talk about this in a little detail on the next slide, in more detail on the next slide.
Yeah, so what it says, what does that mean?
Yes. So, not speaking in legalese as the act came out. So institutions, what is the money going for? How are they using the aid? To support those low income students, also minority students. So if historically Black colleges got additional support and funding, um, also Hispanic serving institutions received additional funding. So my school is designated as a Hispanic serving institution. So it doesn't mean that they're only supporting students of a certain nationality, or a race, but it's supporting the majority of those students or a significant portion of the students in that institution do qualify and make us a Hispanic serving institution. So we received additional funding just to support targeted areas. Also, the institutions that are serving large numbers of students. Previously, I alluded to that the target was education stabilization. So those nurses, the EMTs, those individuals in those areas or fields of study, we received additional distributions of money to support them. So additional allocations were given directly to support those students. So what did that mean? It meant that we had to go out and look for partners and look for vendors to help us meet the needs of the student. I think Meredith alluded to this earlier, and I think you did also, Liz, that education doesn't have all the answers, but what we do have are a lot of questions, and we are depending on our partners in the private sector to help us with those to formulate those answers and thinking outside the box.
Definitely. Let's move to priorities. And I think too, I'm not sure when you were planning, you've got a few anecdotes that you'd shared with us yesterday, and I want to make sure that you have time to share those, because I think that some of the ways that decisions are happening they're different now, and I think understanding the priorities is important, but also understanding that there's a lot more questions than answers. And on the private sector side, if we look at the questions, we wear a really different hat, and we might see things differently. And I know you've got a couple examples of that.
So one example is for us, we're looking at how do we reopen, and we've had numerous conversations at an administrative level on saying, what do we do? Do we use touchless thermometers? How do we facilitate this? I mean, we started out looking at, do we have a temperature taker? Okay, that's not best practice. So we actually had a vendor that came to us with a product that they're developing, and we had a webinar with them, and they were helping us to help frame the question. And this provider, I mean, in understanding that we still are under the purchasing guidelines of competitive bidding and also joint and cooperative agreements. So we try to use those agreements as much as possible, but we were looking to the vendor to help us find the right solution. Another thing is that change is constant right now. So we're looking at our priorities. Of course, our priorities are not changing. We want to continue to provide that direct student aid and the resources for that. But we're also changing the way we deliver our courses and who we're delivering our courses to. So online education is important. Also, what we're looking at is hybrid education. So my institution will not be opening in the fall, but we're looking at a hybrid solution. And again, that could change depending on what our county health
Yeah.
department does for us. California is changing. Um, Last week, we got recent legislation that said and overturned some of the eligibility requirements. So previously, undocumented and international students were not eligible to receive CARES dollars and direct aid. So there was a court case that was decided that we could now distribute funds to undocumented and international students. Well, hold the presses. The next day, we got an email at the local level that said, wait before you spend it, turn off the check printer, figuratively, because this might be overturned. So change again is constant.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. So let's close out with higher ed practical insights. And this is interesting, and I've found this. And then my only thought here is how much of this have you seen be, if any, up for interpretation, or is it very straightforward and easy to figure out what falls where?
It's very straightforward. We got additional clarification. Sometimes the rules come after the funding. So it's very straightforward. The expenses can be used on those Pell eligible students to support their education. And this is the non-direct aid portion. So what the institution is spending on. So we spent funds to support student and faculty technology. So that was MiFi's, that was our additional laptop loaners that we gave to students. And we were creative. We looked at how could we lease probably instead of buy. Are there products where we could purchase and every 5 years or every 3 years turn those computers around and get some more efficiency in the most common computers or more up to date. We looked to the internet. Who could provide us with the services we needed? I'm at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountain, so some of the individuals are in remote areas. They may not be necessarily in the country, but they're up in the mountains. So software purchases. So looking at different software technology. What software can we use that would allow us to simulate a chemistry lab? Remote services for our students, proctoring and tutoring. How do we help our students and connect with them to make sure that they're going to be successful? Because we don't want to enroll students and then have them flunk and not be able to complete. So how do we support the student through tutoring and also when they're taking their test to make sure that there's some academic integrity there? Then another thing that was so important, and this is what we saw in Meredith, I don't know if you saw this in K12 too, but there were some knowledge gaps. And in terms of what our students were understanding in terms of online instruction, we are serving students that could have been 16 to 60. So the skill set was quite different. Some of them were not used to a Google Classroom that could be, oh my gosh, we're having an earthquake. Hold on, just one moment.
Stop it.
Oh my
Hold
goodness.
on.
Okay, I'll just talk for a minute.
Hold on.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, we definitely saw those gaps too, Dr. Harmon. We had students who there was major gaps in their learning from March to June, and then you have students who didn't have the support either from family or guardians, or they didn't have the stable internet access like you talked about, and so there were some definite gaps there in their learning because of the remote learning model that we all just had to take on suddenly in March.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So one of the things for me, this is Liz, we did, as an organization, Agile, we did some webinars that were like family friendly, and we ended up with a couple third grade classes that joined us, every week. We did some astronomy webinars. Third graders didn't know what a webinar was. They didn't know how to use it. So there definitely is this gap in understanding. And I think, from Dr. Harmon's side, getting, young adult to, older adult, the older adults don't really know how to use it. They need some help, some additional supports. But on the K-12 side, I found it really interesting. Fourth grade, at least in Arizona, is generally when you start being more independent and you get a Chromebook. And my son was in third grade. He didn't know how to use email. He didn't know how to forward reply, didn't know any of that. So that is something that is definitely just those basic skills that I think is, on the younger set, and then as, potentially mixed, and then more a little bit toward some of the older students. Dr. Harmon, how's it going for you?
The earthquake has stopped.
Well, that's
Okay.
good. Welcome
So,
back.
um, it is what it is, and this is a part of education. Actually, one of our colleges was hit with the earthquake July 4th last year. So, yeah, it is what it is, and we just keep rolling and continuing. Um, so, in addition to professional development, it was infrastructure modifications. We had different modalities of learning. So how do we deliver on different platforms? What's the best approach? Again, I mentioned lab services. So how do we modify our infrastructure, and not necessarily brick and mortar, but our IT infrastructure? One thing we saw was that we couldn't service our students because the project that was going to put Wi-Fi in our parking lots was further out. And what we needed, the students needed access now. So we were able to change a few things, and some things had to wait that were bond funded. We're still waiting, but we had to get immediate access in our parking lots under our solar fields to allow students to be able to access the internet or download information from the college. So, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that drive-in movie style is
Yeah.
going to be something we see more of.
Mhm.
So this last section I think is going to be super interesting. So this will be probably for all of us a little bit, and we have definitely talked about some of this, but effects of school closure. And I remember yesterday when we were kind of laying these out, there's crossover, and the issue, the effect on higher education. There's kind of something that's also to consider in K-12. So Dr. Harmon, maybe keep us going a little bit and walk us through these. And thank you for bringing up and putting here mental health concerns. We actually did have a question about, is SEL included under health and safety? And so maybe as part of this, you can address that question.
So, one of the effects that we're seeing are changes in enrollment. And depending if you're in an urban area or if you are in a rural area, your enrollment could be increasing or your enrollment could be significantly decreasing. So anything that we're looking at, and things are not kind of what we would normally see. So we are looking at marketing. How do we market effectively and not traditional just texting or sending emails, but looking more at a business model. How can we meet our students where they are and make sure that they're able to enroll? Looking at apps, what apps out there can help us to meet that enrollment challenge and stay connected with our students. We also extended our spring semester. So we had a longer time to get those nursing students through the process. And I talked before about curriculum in K-12, or in higher ed, we call it pedagogy. So looking at modifying the lesson plans or the syllabus or the syllabi to make sure that we're delivering the same content, but we're looking again to the business community to help us solve those solutions. And mental health concerns. So, and as you mentioned, Liz, I'm a parent. So we're trying to work, parent, and maintain our households all at the same time. So we saw our students were having some concerns. So telehealth, looking, and again, because my institution serves a large amount of Pell eligible students, we need to have these services for them to help them to continue to attend. We usually, in a normal world, would have a nurse and a college health center. But how do we provide those same services in a mental health capacity? I mean, we as employees get that through our employee benefit association, but how do we provide that for our students to make sure they're able to handle the competing demands? And then one other thing that we're looking at is how do we reopen?
Mhm.
And I think Meredith brought this up. We're not just reopening just for students who can necessarily attend 100%. We have students that are disabled that we may need to have special considerations as we reopen. What areas will we reopen? What will our science labs look like? I also have a son that's on the spectrum. So
Mhm.
looking for those educational, and how do we make sure that we're delivering and supporting those students also, and meeting the requirements of the American Disabilities Act, or meeting the requirements that are in someone's IEP. There can be legal ramifications if we're not meeting those. A lot, understand there's a lot we can do, and being creative and thinking outside the box to help meet the needs of our students and their families, especially for higher ed and community colleges.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing all of that. And there was a lot of considerations, especially, in the community college world, that I hadn't thought of. So it was very eye-opening for me. Um, Meredith, would you kind of take us through some of the effects of school closures and some of the ongoing considerations on the K-12 side?
Definitely. Dr. Harmon already mentioned this earlier, but traditionally, the way that public schools receive funding is through their daily attendance, and students have to be present 60% of the day, and that's 60% academic time, not just being there 60% of the day. And so that's obviously been a game changer for us as we went to a home learning model in March. And that's something that
Meredith, I think we may have lost your audio.
uh-oh.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Parental influence, is a huge factor. You have parents who are working from home. I'm so glad we brought up the mental health and emotional health issues that are taking place as parents are trying to balance everything. But on the unfortunate other side of this is for our K-12 students, especially our younger K-12 students, some of them come from homes that are very troublesome. And so that's been a factor for us to consider, where sometimes we have students where school is their only safe place. It's the only place where they get meals. It's the only place where they are cared for. And so that's obviously a huge factor to the effects of school closures. Our state versus federal rulings, I'm grateful for the autonomy that the states have to make some of these decisions on how to spend this CARES Act funding, because I feel it'd be frustrating to be told you have to spend this in this way when you have a state like Mississippi that is very different than maybe like Arizona, or just a different area of the country.
Absolutely.
And so you see some of these school closures, or the effects of school closures, they're similar, from K-12 to higher education, in many ways, and then in other ways, they vary. And so it's just been a large a challenge for everybody. And what I'm so grateful for is, of course, vendors are trying to be successful in their business, but I'm grateful for vendors who are seeking to help, because at this point, I think everybody is just trying to figure out how we best navigate this, what's best for students, what's best for teachers, taking in all these effects, into consideration.
Yeah, thank you both for walking us through some of these things, and it's it's just a really big challenge, and we all need to be together and be good to each other, because it's challenging. So let's move to a couple questions. I think we covered the SEL one, and thank you both for sort of covering that on both sides of our education spectrum. The first question that came through, and you touched a little bit on this, Meredith, but so Brian is asking, what does it mean, quote, flow to local agencies? So he operates out of Florida, and so I'm feeling like he might be from an educational institution, but he operates out of Florida. So does that mean that he wouldn't qualify for CARES funding in Texas? And I don't even know if you would know the answer to that. I do not.
I don't. I'm so sorry. I don't know. I mean, so he's in Florida and he's trying to get funding in Texas? Is that what you said?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Well, I will, I'll take that to someone on my end and see if we can't get a question there. And then Brian also asked about principals and superintendents and who actually is making the decisions on this funding. And I think that that's a fair question on both sides. And you talked a little bit about it, but just, I get the sense that it's all over the board. There's a lot of flexibility. So who is really holding the purse strings? Meredith, on the K-12 side.
Sure. So on the K-12 side, speaking from Mississippi, there's guidelines given by the State Department of Education, and then superintendents are working with a panel. So they're working with principals and teachers and parents to make these decisions about what is best for the reopening of fall. And then, of course, as you reopen for fall, then you have to determine how you're going to spend that funding to be able to do that. And so the funding aspect, I don't believe parents are so much involved in that, but their requests and their opinions are taken into consideration, and it really comes down to principals and superintendents.
Okay. And how is it on the community college higher ed side, as far as you've seen, Dr. Harmon?
I think the final decision makers, of course, are the presidents and chancellors. But honestly, the day-to-day, I rely on my directors and my managers to send me the vendor information. They know the plan. They know what our needs are. And we rely on them to do some of the grass roots, because we're in Zoom meetings all day and we're just trying to keep our inbox clean. So I really rely on those individuals. But I will say, in terms of parenting, because I saw a website and it had a list of free software, and I won't name what software that I used, but I looked at it for my students. And then because I work with education, K-12, in my professional career, I contacted the school and said, have you thought about this? Are you looking into that? I emailed my son's teachers and said, oh, this is a great site that's providing a free trial for XYZ. So I do try to influence, and maybe it's just because of the nature of my position, I do try to influence and see what best products and things are out there.
Yeah, thank you for going back to that story, because I think that that's really important too. So I feel like the answer is the final say and sign off is remains with, you know, the same people. The level of influence that even parents are having is definitely increased because there's so many additional tasks on everyone's plate. So that's a great question, and I think that yeah, and thank you both for walking us through that. Generosa asked a really interesting question. So she's asking, you know, view that distance education online are being stressed for this next school year. Are schools even going to be buying or ordering textbooks? And, you know, I don't know if either of you have a sense for that. I would guess no.
So yeah, I was, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Meredith.
you go ahead. It's fine.
So I work with our bookstore, and I'm over the as an auxiliary. And yeah, we're still continuing to purchase textbooks.
Okay.
So what we're doing, because we have to provide for all individuals. So there's some that cannot necessarily read on the computer screens. So we continue to do textbooks, and we offer a service where they can get free shipping of the textbook to their home, and they are returning their books to the bookstore via a shipping label. And that's what we did for the spring. That's what we're doing for summer. And that's what we're doing for the fall. We do have some teachers who use open education resources, and then we have some teachers that are using online materials. But those online materials still have to be in a format for accessible to all students. So if they want a hard copy, we're buying the books.
Okay, interesting. What about the K-12 side?
Okay, so I would say yes too. Not as much in years past because there is so much available online. But also, so just real quickly, when we shut schools down in March, we knew we had students that didn't have, you know, internet access or the availability to a computer, and so we printed off take-home packets, and we kept them under the awnings of each school for parents to be able to pick up. And you would think it's 2020, most people are going to be doing their schooling online. Probably not a lot of people are going to pick up these take-home packets. And all of the take-home packets were taken every week. And I think there's two reasons behind that, especially for the younger K-12 student body, is they might not have had internet access or access to a computer or tablet. And then some parents and some students still like to have something in their hands. They still like to have a book or a packet or something tangible to work with.
Okay. That clearly was not what I was thinking. There's two questions, and actually a bunch of questions just came in, so we've got a few more minutes left. So there's one more minute left. So with the CARES Act, are the funds making it to schools yet? And is there a deadline for that?
So a portion of the funding has been distributed to the schools. We're waiting to see what the final deadline will be. So right now we have it for about a year to expend most of the funds, but we're waiting for the second allocation. So most of the direct aid to students, or portion of it, has already for us in higher ed. We've given that to students, and we did that in the spring, immediately after the shutdown. But the more the institutional funds we're still waiting for. But who knows?
Yeah.
Legislation could change.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too. There's a couple questions, and I'm not sure because I think one person is pointing out we may have, with us trying to talk super practically about our experience and also share some of the verbatim verbiage. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask one final question, and if it's not something that we can clarify or tackle, we'll definitely take it offline and get a follow-up to the people that have asked this. So Dave is asking, I thought the LEAs needed to apply to the Department of Education for ESSER funds. And then he points out in earlier slides, you made it sound like the money was dispersed to the states. Can either of you help clarify that? And my apologies, we certainly were not trying to be confusing. I'm not sure that I can untangle that.
Okay, so from a K-12 perspective, yes, they did have to apply for it, but yes, it was also distributed. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So, yeah,
Was it
I can't.
the state's individual departments of education that they applied to? Is that where we were
Yes.
getting confusion? Okay. All right. So I think I understand that, and hopefully that answers that as well. Someone else pointed out that maybe there's a July 1st deadline for ESSER funds. But I think, Dr. Harmon, the point you made that this is an ever-changing thing, and with plans not even being solidified moving forward, you know, everything could continue to change. So we'll definitely keep track of all of this and do our best. From the Agile side, we've been doing our very best to keep all of our frontline people, your account managers and your reps, in the know about things that are going on. Most people have a collection of states, so they can sort of condense the level of knowledge that they need to be keeping. So, you know, continue to rely on them for questions. I think that, well, we definitely have met all of our time for today. I want to thank you both very much. I also definitely appreciate everyone who joined us, and thank you so much for your questions. This was the first in our summer series of webinars. So there's the websites there for registrations. It's also on our homepage. We have a couple coming up. We have our teacher spending survey readout. We have Michael Niehoff is going to be taking us through tomorrow's education landscape, which I think will be a really nice companion piece to what the topics that we covered today. And then in August, Brian Healy is going to be back with me, and we're going to talk about influencer marketing and does it work. You know, with everything changing and, you know, people working from home, teachers even working from home, we felt like it would be really important for us to take a really good deep dive into influencer marketing. And so we'll be bringing that to you in August. Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Harmon. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I know, Dr. Harmon, you've gotten off a meeting, had an earthquake. It's been quite a day for you. I hope you're able to have some iced tea and bonbons now and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again, Meredith, for walking us through this and helping us really get a good sense for all the different things that educators are grappling with and prioritizing. On the home front, they're the same as us. And, you know, in schools, in K-12 and in community college, and I'm so grateful, Dr. Harmon, that we found you, because I think that there's an additional layer that comes in the K-12 and the community college space where your breadth of responsibility is just beyond just the academic. And I think that, you know, anything that we as vendors and, you know, on the private side can do to think very holistically about that and how we can help, that is going to build a relationship. It will result in selling, I think. And there was one question that came through about, you know, people aren't making spending decisions now. So take this time to build that relationship, because the spending is going to happen. So just be the one who's been helping them in all the other things they're trying to tackle. First, it's prioritization is probably the biggest obstacle right now to people cutting checks and making those big decisions, because they've got so many other things up front in it. So if you can help them work through that list, they're going to get to your particular issue a lot faster, would be, you know, my commentary on that. So with that, thank you for your extra minutes. Dr. Harmon, thank you so much. Meredith, thank you so much. And I look forward to having everyone back in July, and we'll go through our teacher spending survey that had a few more pandemic related, school closure related questions, and we'll have our researchers there to walk everyone through it and give some additional insights. So thank you so much, and we will talk to you all next month.
Thank you.